The grand ballroom of the Celestial Palace stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floor, its crystalline walls reaching toward a dome that displayed the swirling nebulae of the Andromeda sector in real time. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered for the most anticipated event in 1,000 cycles, the choosing ceremony of Queen Zalera Vexthera, the most beautiful and powerful being in known space. Captain Markuschen stood at the edge of the human delegation, feeling distinctly out of place among the assembled dignitaries. As the sole representative of Earth's recently discovered civilization, he wore his formal dress uniform with its simple blue fabric and minimal decorations. Around him, beings of incredible beauty and power displayed their wealth through bioluminescent skin modifications, gravity-defying garments woven from stellar matter, and crowns that contained miniature stars. The Zephyrian ambassador beside him stood nearly 3 meters tall, his crystalline skin refracting light into rainbow patterns that shifted with his emotions. "How quaint that they invited the humans," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species. "Though I suppose even primitive species deserve to witness history." Marcus said nothing, having grown accustomed to such comments during his 6 months as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council. Humanity had been discovered only recently when their first faster-than-light ship had stumbled into galactic space, and most species viewed them as barely evolved creatures worthy of observation but little respect. The massive doors at the far end of the ballroom began to open with a sound like distant thunder. A hush fell over the assembled thousands as Queen Zalera made her entrance. Marcus had seen holographic recordings of her before, but no recording could capture the sheer presence she commanded. She moved with liquid grace, her form shifting between the physical and something beyond mortal perception. Her skin held the deep blue-black of space itself, dotted with points of light that mimicked constellations. Her eyes were twin nebulae, swirling with colors that had no names in any human language. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species, a being who had evolved beyond the constraints of mere flesh into something that touched the divine. Her gown seemed to be cut from the fabric of reality itself, flowing around her like captured starlight. As she walked, the very air around her shimmered with power that made reality bend slightly at the edges. This was a being who could reshape matter with a thought, who commanded fleets that could glass entire star systems, whose empire spanned 17 galaxies. "Behold," announced the herald, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast space, "Queen Zalera Vexthera, Empress of the 17 realms, commander of the void fleets, she who walks between stars, approaches the choosing. For 1,000 cycles, she has ruled alone. Today, she selects her eternal companion from among the greatest beings in existence." The ceremony was ancient, dating back to the first galactic civilizations. When a ruler of Zalera's magnitude chose a mate, it wasn't merely personal, it was a political act that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. Her choice would elevate not just an individual but their entire species to unimaginable heights of influence and respect. One by one, the candidates were presented. Prince Thalarix of the Andromedans stepped forward first, his forearms spread wide in a display that made his bioluminescent patches flare like captured lightning. He was beautiful even by galactic standards, his species having perfected their forms through millions of years of genetic manipulation. His proposal was a poem in the ancient tongue, offering to merge his empire with hers and create a dynasty that would rule until the heat death of the universe. The queen listened with polite attention but showed no emotion. Next came Warlord Kethrix, whose species had conquered 12 galaxies through pure military might. His proposal was a demonstration of power. With a gesture, he made a miniature black hole appear in his palm, matter swirling around it in perfect order before he dismissed it with another wave. He offered her command of his armies and promised to expand her empire beyond anything previously imagined. Again, the queen remained impassive. The presentations continued for hours. The ethereal collective's representative dissolved into pure energy before reforming, offering to share the secrets of transcendence beyond physical form. The machine emperor displayed his perfected synthetic form and promised an empire that would never know decay or death. Ancient beings whose names were legends offered treasures that could buy solar systems, technologies that could rewrite the laws of physics, and knowledge gathered over millions of years. Each presentation was more spectacular than the last. The assembled crowd murmured their appreciation for displays of power and beauty that would have been considered miraculous on Earth. Marcus found himself wondering why he was even here. Earth had nothing to offer a being like Queen Zalera. They were a young species, barely past their own planet, with technology that was primitive by galactic standards. As the final candidate finished his presentation, a being of living crystal who offered to share the immortality of the mineral realm, the herald called out, "Are there any others who would seek the Queen's favor?" The question was mere formality. Everyone knew the Queen would choose from among the great powers, likely Prince Thalarix or perhaps the Machine Emperor. The choice would be political as much as personal, cementing alliances that would shape the galaxy for millennia. That was when something unprecedented happened. Queen Zalera raised her hand, and, when she spoke, her voice carried the music of solar winds and the whisper of cosmic radiation. "I have heard the offerings of empires and the promises of powers beyond counting. Yet my heart calls for something different." She began to move through the crowd, her presence parting the assembled dignitaries like a stellar wind. Beings who commanded star systems stepped aside, their expressions a mixture of hope and terror. Where was she going? Who could possibly have caught the attention of the galaxy's greatest ruler? Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if reality was shifting around him. The Queen's path seemed to be leading in his direction, but that was impossible. He glanced around, looking for the powerful being she must be approaching. Perhaps there was someone behind him he hadn't noticed, some hidden emperor or ancient entity who had concealed their presence until now. But the crowd was parting around him, and, suddenly, Marcus found himself standing alone in a circle of empty space as thousands of eyes turned toward him. The Queen continued her approach, her nebula eyes fixed directly on his face. "No," breathed the Zephyrian ambassador beside him. "This cannot be happening." But it was happening. Queen Zalera stopped directly in front of Marcus, so close he could feel the stellar winds that accompanied her presence. Up close, he could see that her beauty was even more overwhelming than he had imagined, but there was something else in her expression, something almost vulnerable beneath the cosmic power. "You are Marcus Chen of Earth," she said, her voice now intimate despite carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "You speak for your species before the Galactic Council." "Yes, Your Majesty," Marcus managed, his throat suddenly dry. Around them, the silence was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "I have watched the proceedings of the council," she continued. "I have observed how you defend your people despite being surrounded by those who consider you inferior. I have seen how you maintain your dignity in the face of contempt, how you seek understanding rather than dominance, how you offer cooperation where others demand submission." Marcus stared at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. I don't understand." A smile touched her lips, and, for a moment, the cosmic force that she embodied seemed almost human. "In all my centuries, surrounded by beings of immense power and beauty, I have never encountered what you possess in abundance." "What do I possess?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "Courage," she said simply. "Not the courage of the warrior who knows he can win, but the courage of someone who stands for what is right even when defeat seems certain. You came here knowing your species is considered primitive, knowing you would face mockery and dismissal, yet you came anyway because your people needed a voice." The Queen gestured to the assembled crowd, her expression growing slightly sad. "All of these beings offer me power I already possess, beauty I have surpassed, and knowledge I have long since acquired. They seek to join with me to gain what they lack. But you..." She turned back to him, her nebula eyes swirling with something that might have been wonder. "You offer something I have never known despite all my power. You offer the strength of someone who fights not for glory or conquest, but for love of others." Marcus felt the weight of thousands of stares, the political implications of this moment crashing down on him. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not sure you understand what this would mean. My species is young, we have little to offer your empire. Choosing me would bring you no political advantage, no increase in power or territory." "Exactly," she said, and her smile became radiant. "For the first time in my existence, I can choose with my heart rather than my crown. I can select a companion based not on what they can give me, but on who they are." She raised her voice, and, once again it carried the authority of stars. "I have made my choice. Marcus Chen of Earth, will you accept the bond of eternal companionship? Will you stand beside me not as a conqueror or a king, but as an equal partner in whatever comes?" The ballroom erupted. Shouts of outrage and disbelief echoed from the assembled dignitaries. The Andromedan's bioluminescent patches flared angry red. The Machine Emperor's optical sensors blazed with what could only be fury. Prince Thalaric stepped forward, his forearms spread in a gesture of challenge. "This is an insult to every civilized being here," he declared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "To choose a primitive over the greatest powers in the galaxy, it's madness." But Queen Zalara's eyes never left Marcus's face. "The choice is yours," she said quietly. "I can offer you wonders beyond imagination, but I can also promise you challenges that would break most beings. If you accept, you will be hated by some of the most powerful entities in existence. You will be seen as an upstart who stole what others consider rightfully theirs. Are you prepared for that burden?" Marcus looked into her swirling nebula eyes and saw something that transcended her cosmic power. He saw loneliness, a being so elevated above others that she had never known true companionship. He saw hope, the possibility of connection with someone who would value her for herself rather than her position. And he saw fear that even now, at this moment of vulnerability, he might reject her. Around them, the chaos continued to grow. Ancient alliances were cracking under the strain of this unprecedented choice. Wars might begin over this moment. The balance of galactic power was shifting with each second he delayed his answer. But, when Marcus looked at Zalara, all he saw was a woman asking if he cared enough to face the universe beside her. "Yes," he said simply. "I accept." The words seemed to strike the ballroom like a physical force. The chaos of voices died into stunned silence as the implications sank in. The Queen of 17 Galaxies, the most powerful being in known space, had chosen a human, a species barely past their home planet, as her eternal companion. Queen Zalara's smile was like sunrise over a virgin world. She reached out her hand, and, when Marcus took it, he felt power beyond description flow through the connection. Not overwhelming him, but sharing with him, including him in something magnificent. "Then, let it be witnessed," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy through quantum communications. "Marcus Chen of Earth is my chosen companion, my equal partner, my beloved mate. From this moment forward, he speaks with my voice and acts with my authority. Any who would harm him harm me. Any who would dishonor him dishonor me." She turned to address the assembled crowd, her presence now somehow even more majestic. "I know this choice surprises you. Some of you are angered by it, feeling that your own offers were superior. But, consider this: if a being as young and inexperienced as a human can display the nobility and courage that I find so compelling, what does that say about the potential of every species here?" Prince Thalaric stepped forward again, his bioluminescent patches now pulsing with barely controlled rage. "This cannot stand. The Andromedans have been loyal allies for 10,000 cycles. We have served your empire faithfully, provided our fleets for your wars, our resources for your projects. To be passed over for this." He gestured dismissively at Marcus. "Your service has been noted and appreciated," Queen Zalara replied, her tone becoming dangerous. "But it has also been compensated. I owe you nothing beyond what has already been given. You owe us respect." Thalaric shot back. "You owe us consideration for our station, our power, our contributions to galactic civilization." "I owe you nothing," she repeated, and now her voice carried the chill of deep space. "I am not a prize to be won through service or a reward to be claimed through power. I am a being making a free choice, and I choose love over politics, courage over calculation, heart over empire." The Machine Emperor stepped forward, his synthetic voice cutting through the tension. "This decision will have consequences, Zalara. The balance of power that has maintained peace across 17 galaxies depends on calculated alliances, not romantic whims. By choosing a human, you destabilize everything." "Then, perhaps it is time for things to be destabilized," she replied. "Perhaps it is time to build something new, something based on merit rather than fear, on cooperation rather than domination." She squeezed Marcus's hand, and he felt strength flow into him, not just physical strength, but the confidence to face what was coming. "My mate has shown me that there are forms of power I had forgotten existed. The power of standing for what is right rather than what is profitable. The power of fighting for others rather than oneself. The power of choosing love in the face of fear." The crowd stirred restlessly, and Marcus could see alliances forming and breaking in real time. Some species were clearly planning to test this new dynamic, to see if the Queen's protection of a human was more than words. Others seemed genuinely intrigued by her reasoning, perhaps recognizing something they had lost in their pursuit of power and position. The ethereal collective's representatives spoke, their form shifting like captured aurora. If this is your will, we accept it. But, know that others will not be so accommodating. There are forces in the galaxy that see any change in the established order as an opportunity for chaos. Let them come, Queen Zalera said simply. Marcus and I will face whatever challenges arise together. As if summoned by her words, a new presence made itself known. The temperature in the ballroom dropped several degrees, and shadows began to gather at the edges of the great space despite the brilliant illumination. A figure stepped out of the darkness, tall, angular, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. How touching, the figure said, their voice carrying the whisper of dying stars. The great Queen Zalera has found love at last. But, love makes one vulnerable, does it not? It gives one weaknesses that can be exploited. Marcus felt Zalera's hand tighten on his as she turned to face this new threat. Lord Vextar. I wondered when you would make your appearance. The shadow being smiled, an expression that somehow made the darkness around them deeper. Did you think I would miss such a momentous occasion? Your father's greatest enemy paying respects to your choice of mate? Especially such an interesting choice. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. This being radiated malevolence like a dark star, and the way Zalera tensed beside him suggested that Lord Vextar represented a threat unlike any other. My father is long dead, Zalera said, her voice carefully controlled. Whatever quarrel you had with him died with him. Oh, but it didn't, Vextar replied, beginning to circle them like a predator. Your father destroyed my empire, scattered my fleets, imprisoned me in the void between galaxies. It took me centuries to escape, centuries to rebuild. And, all that time, I planned my revenge. He stopped directly in front of them, his dark eyes fixed on Marcus. But, revenge on you alone would be too simple. Far better to make you suffer as I suffered. To take away what you love most and let you live with the loss. Marcus felt power gathering around the shadow being, a crushing weight that made reality itself seem to buckle. But, before Vextar could act, Queen Zalera stepped forward, placing herself between the threat and her chosen mate. If you wish to challenge me, do so directly, she said, stellar winds beginning to swirl around her. But, know that I am not my father, and I am far stronger than he ever was. Vextar laughed, a sound like neutron stars colliding. Stronger, perhaps. But, also more vulnerable. Your father cared only for power and conquest. You, it seems, have discovered love. And, love, my dear Zalera, is the greatest weakness of all. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of the Galactic Council's enforcement fleet. Dozens of ships materialized in the space around the Celestial Palace, their weapons powered but not yet targeted. The lead ship's communication array activated, projecting a hologram into the ballroom. Chancellor Corvex, head of the Galactic Council, appeared as a towering figure of crystalline energy. This gathering has attracted the attention of forces we cannot ignore. Lord Vextar, you are in violation of 17 different peace treaties simply by being here. Queen Zalera, your choice has already triggered 3 separate alliance challenges and 2 formal declarations of intent to reconsider treaty obligations. Are you here to arrest me for choosing love? Zalera asked, her tone dangerously sweet. I am here to prevent a galactic war, Corvex replied bluntly. Your choice, while legally valid, has consequences that extend far beyond personal preference. There are those who see this as an opportunity to remake the galactic order, and others who view it as an insult requiring satisfaction. Marcus found his voice for the first time since this confrontation began. Chancellor Corvex, with respect, what exactly are you proposing? The Chancellor's crystalline form turned toward him, and Marcus felt the weight of an intelligence vast beyond human comprehension studying him. You are the catalyst for this situation, young human. Perhaps you should be the one to resolve it. I don't understand. A trial by challenge, Corvex explained. Ancient galactic law provides for situations where the actions of one being threaten the stability of interstellar relations. If you can prove your worthiness through trial, then Queen Zalera's choice stands unquestioned. If you fail. If he fails, he dies, Lord Vextar finished with evident pleasure. And Zalera learns the price of loving someone weak. Marcus felt the eyes of the galaxy upon him. The assembled dignitaries, the enforcement fleet, billions of beings watching through quantum communications, all waiting for his response. He could refuse, step aside, and let diplomatic negotiations determine the outcome. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. But he looked at Queen Zalera and saw in her nebula eyes the same vulnerability he had glimpsed before. She had taken an unprecedented risk by choosing him, had opened herself to ridicule and challenge for the sake of something real in a universe full of political calculation. How could he offer her anything less in return? I accept the trial, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast ballroom. Name the challenge. Lord Vextar's smile widened, showing teeth like black holes. Excellent. I volunteer to serve as the challenge. Chancellor Corvex's energy form flickered with what might have been surprise. That is irregular. Typically, the challenge is issued by one of the offended parties, not by a third entity. But I am an offended party, Vextar replied smoothly. The human's elevation threatens the established order that keeps my kind in check. If primitive species can rise to positions of power through royal favor rather than earned strength, then the very foundations of galactic civilization are at risk. Marcus saw the trap immediately. This wasn't about him or Zalera, it was about Vextar's desire for revenge. By accepting the challenge against him instead of one of the slighted suitors, Marcus would be facing a being of immense power and ancient malice who had every reason to want him dead. But refusing now would be seen as cowardice, and cowardice would invalidate Zalera's choice just as surely as defeat. I accept, Marcus said again. What are the terms? Single combat, Vextar replied instantly. No weapons save what we carry within ourselves. No assistance from allies or technology. A battle to determine who is truly worthy of standing beside the Queen of 17 Galaxies. Queen Zalera stepped forward, her stellar winds beginning to intensify. This is madness. Marcus is human, he cannot hope to match a being like Vextar in personal combat. Then, perhaps, Vextar said softly, you chose poorly. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Zalera had declared. Around them, the assembled beings watched in fascination as events spiraled toward violence. This was no longer just about a royal marriage, it was about the fundamental question of whether power alone determined worth, or whether other qualities might matter just as much. Marcus felt fear, certainly. But, stronger than fear was a determination that surprised him with its intensity. He had come to represent humanity among the stars, to prove that his species deserved a place in galactic civilization. Now he had the chance to prove it in the most direct way possible. When and where, he asked. Here, Vextar replied, gesturing to the ballroom around them. Now. Let the galaxy witness what happens when pretension meets reality. Chancellor Corvex raised a crystalline hand. Very well. By the ancient laws, let this challenge be witnessed and judged. The combat will continue until one combatant yields, dies, or is rendered incapable of continuing. The winner's position is validated, the loser's is forfeit. The crowd began to pull back, creating a vast circle of empty space in the center of the ballroom. Security fields activated to protect the observers, while recording devices focused on the arena where Marcus and Lord Vextar faced each other across a dozen meters of polished obsidian. Queen Zalera reached for Marcus's hand one last time. When their fingers touched, he felt something flow between them, not power, exactly, but understanding. Love. Support. The knowledge that whatever happened, she believed in him. Remember, she whispered, courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of fear for the sake of something greater than yourself. Marcus nodded, then, stepped away from her and into the arena. Across from him, Lord Vextar was growing larger, his form expanding as he drew upon reserves of dark energy. Shadows writhed around him like living things, and the temperature continued to drop. Last chance to withdraw, little human, Vextar called out, his voice now echoing with the power of collapsing stars. Acknowledge your inferiority and, perhaps I will make your death quick. Marcus centered himself, drawing on every lesson from his military training, every moment of discipline learned in Earth's armed forces. He was outclassed in every measurable way, facing a being who could probably destroy planets with a thought. But he had something Vexstar didn't understand, something that couldn't be measured in raw power. "I didn't come this far to give up now," Marcus replied, settling into a combat stance. Lord Vexstar laughed and attacked. The battle was joined, and the fate of human galactic relations hung in the balance. The attack came faster than thought itself. One moment Lord Vexstar stood across the arena, the next he was everywhere at once, his form dissolving into living shadow that struck from a dozen angles simultaneously. Marcus threw himself sideways, feeling tendrils of absolute darkness slice through the air where his head had been moments before. The obsidian floor beneath his feet cracked and split as Vexstar's power lashed out, sending waves of crushing force that made the air itself seem solid. Marcus rolled behind a pillar of crystalline light that formed the ballroom's structure, using it as momentary cover while his mind raced to process what he was facing. This wasn't just a physical opponent. Vexstar was a fundamental force of entropy given form, a being who existed to unmake what others had created. Every instinct Marcus possessed screamed at him to run, to find some way out of this impossible situation. But running wasn't an option. Behind those security barriers, Queen Zalera watched with eyes that held both fear and faith. Beyond the palace, the entire galaxy waited to see whether a human could prove worthy of standing among the stars. And, somewhere in the vast cosmos, Earth itself looked to its representative to show that humanity deserved respect. Vexstar's laughter echoed through the arena as his shadow form flowed around the pillar, seeking his prey. "Where are you, little human? Are you hiding already? How disappointing. I expected at least a few minutes of entertainment before you died." Marcus studied the patterns of the shadow being's movement, noting how the darkness seemed to have substance in some places and none in others. There had to be a core, some central point where Vexstar's consciousness resided. But how could a human with no supernatural powers hope to find it? The answer came from an unexpected source: his training as a pilot. In space, you learn to read energy signatures, to understand how ships move through vacuum, to predict patterns based on minimal information. Vexstar might be a cosmic entity, but he was still bound by certain physical laws. Marcus pulled out his sidearm, a simple kinetic weapon that fired solid projectiles rather than energy beams. Primitive by galactic standards, but sometimes primitive meant unpredictable. He waited until Vexstar's shadow form began to coalesce for another attack, then fired 3 quick shots not at where the darkness was thickest, but at the points where it seemed to bend reality around itself. The bullets passed harmlessly through shadow, but one of them struck something solid. Vexstar's scream of rage shook the arena as his form suddenly snapped back together, revealing a tall figure nursing a wounded shoulder. "Impossible," he snarled, dark energy crackling around the injury. "No mere projectile should be able to touch me." Marcus allowed himself a tight smile. "Maybe the problem is that you've spent so long fighting cosmic entities, you forgot how to deal with something simple." It was a minor victory, but it proved something important: Vexstar could be hurt. That meant he could be beaten. The assembled crowd stirred behind their barriers, excited whispers passing between species as they realized this might actually be a contest rather than an execution. Vexstar's eyes blazed with fury as he abandoned his shadow form and charged directly at Marcus. The ancient being moved with terrifying speed, his hands wreathed in energy that could unmake matter at the molecular level. Marcus dove forward rather than backward, rolling between Vexstar's legs and coming up behind him. The move caught his opponent off guard, and Marcus managed to land a solid kick to the back of Vexstar's knee. The blow wouldn't have staggered a human, but it forced the Shadow Lord to stumble slightly, and, in that moment of imbalance, Marcus saw his chance. He wrapped his arms around Vexstar's neck in a chokehold, applying pressure to what he hoped were vital points. For a moment, he felt the satisfaction of a successful grapple. Then, Vexstar's skin began to burn him, not with heat but with cold so intense it felt like fire. Marcus held on as long as he could, but when his grip began to freeze solid, he was forced to let go and fall back. Vexstar spun around, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been respect. "Clever," he admitted, flexing his neck. "But cleverness will only carry you so far against true power." He raised both hands, and the arena filled with a howling wind that came from the space between stars. The temperature plummeted until Marcus's breath came out in crystalline clouds, and frost began to form on every surface. This wasn't just cold, it was the absolute zero of deep space, the temperature at which molecules stopped moving and life itself became impossible. Marcus felt his blood beginning to slow in his veins, his thoughts becoming sluggish as his brain struggled to function in the killing cold. Around the arena, even the security barriers began to strain under the assault of cosmic winter. But, as the cold deepened, Marcus heard something that gave him hope, Queen Zalera's voice, somehow cutting through Vexstar's assault to reach him. Not words, exactly, but a communication that bypassed sound entirely, speaking directly to his mind and heart. "Remember what makes you human," her voice whispered across the impossible distance. "Not your strength, not your speed, but your refusal to give up when others would have fallen." The words kindled something inside Marcus, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. He thought of Earth, of the billions of humans who had struggled and died and fought for the simple right to exist in a universe that didn't care about them. He thought of astronauts who had risked everything to reach for the stars, of soldiers who had stood their ground against impossible odds, of ordinary people who had found extraordinary courage when it mattered most. The cold was trying to steal his life, but life was more than just molecular motion. Life was will, was purpose, was the determination to keep going even when everything logical said you should stop. Marcus forced himself to stand, ice crackling off his uniform as he moved. Each step was agony, each breath a battle against the cosmic winter that surrounded him. But he kept moving, kept fighting, because that was what humans did, they endured. Vexstar stared in disbelief as Marcus approached through the killing cold. "This is impossible. No organic being can survive in absolute zero without protection." "Maybe not," Marcus replied, his words forming clouds of ice crystals. "But I'm not just surviving. I'm still fighting." He lunged forward again, this time targeting Vexstar's solar plexus with a simple punch. The blow should have been impossibly slow, weakened by cold and exhaustion. But it carried something that made up for physical limitations, absolute determination. The punch connected, and Vexstar doubled over with a gasp of surprise. For just a moment, his concentration wavered, and the cosmic winter began to ease. In that moment of weakness, Marcus saw his real opportunity. This wasn't about winning through strength or power, it was about winning through humanity itself. Every species in the galaxy had evolved differently, had developed unique abilities and advantages. Humans had no natural energy projection, no ability to manipulate matter with thought, no innate connection to cosmic forces. What they had was adaptability. The ability to find ways to win even when all the advantages lay with their opponent. Marcus stepped back and began to speak, not to Vexstar but to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the arena despite the supernatural forces at work. "I know what you're all thinking," he called out. "You're watching a primitive human try to fight a cosmic entity, and you're wondering what Queen Zalera could possibly see in someone so limited. You think this proves that power is all that matters, that only the strong deserve respect." Vexstar straightened, his cold aura beginning to intensify again. "Empty words will not save you, human." "Maybe not," Marcus agreed. "But they might save everyone else." He turned to address Prince Thalarix directly. "Your Highness, you offered the Queen military alliance and expanded conquest. But what happens when you've conquered everything? When there are no more worlds to claim, no more species to dominate? What do you do with power when there's nothing left to use it against?" The Andromedan's bioluminescent patches flickered with uncertainty. Marcus shifted his attention to the Machine Emperor. "Your Excellence, you promised perfection and immortality. But perfection means stagnation, no growth, no change, no possibility of becoming something greater than what you already are. Is that really what the galaxy needs?" He was stalling for time, but he was also making a point that seemed to resonate with some of the observers. Several species began murmuring among themselves, and Marcus could see doubt creeping into expressions that had been certain moments before. "And you," he said, turning back to Vexstar. "You offer revenge, destruction, the satisfaction of tearing down what others have built. But what do you create? What do you add to the universe that makes it better than it was before?" Vexstar's eyes blazed with fury. "I offer honesty. I offer reality without the comforting lies that weaker species tell themselves. The universe is cold and dark and uncaring, and only the strong survive. You're right, Marcus said, surprising everyone including himself. The universe is cold and dark and uncaring. But that's exactly why we need something else. That's why we need cooperation instead of conquest, hope instead of despair, love instead of fear. He gestured toward Queen Zalera, who watched from beyond the security barrier with tears of liquid starlight streaming down her face. She could have chosen anyone here. She could have picked the strongest, the most beautiful, the most powerful. Instead, she chose someone who represents the idea that there's more to worth than raw capability. Vexstar laughed, but there was less certainty in it than before. Pretty words, human. But words cannot stand against power. Can't they? Marcus asked. Then, why are you so afraid of them? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the arena, the assembled beings began to stir as they realized what Marcus was really doing. He wasn't trying to win through strength, he was trying to win through truth. I'm not afraid of anything you could say, Vexstar snarled, but his cosmic winter was beginning to weaken as his concentration wavered. Then, why haven't you finished me? Marcus pressed. You could have killed me a dozen times over in the last few minutes. You could have crushed me with a thought, unmade me with a gesture. But, instead, you're here talking to me, trying to prove that your way is the only way that matters. Vexstar's form began to flicker between solid and shadow as uncertainty crept into his ancient mind. Marcus took a step forward. I think you're afraid because you know I'm right. You know that power without purpose is just destruction, that strength without wisdom is just brutality. You know that if beings can choose cooperation over domination, if they can choose love over fear, then everything you represent becomes obsolete. Silence. Vexstar roared, launching himself forward with all his cosmic might. But Marcus was ready for him. At the last moment, he sidestepped and grabbed Vexstar's arm, using the ancient being's own momentum to throw him across the arena. It was a simple judo throw, the kind of technique taught to first-year military cadets, but it worked because Vex_Skortar had committed everything to a brute force attack. The Shadow Lord crashed into the arena wall with a sound like dying galaxies. For a moment, he lay still, stunned by the impact and by the realization that he had been defeated not through power but through skill and timing. Marcus stood over him, breathing hard but victorious. That's the difference between us, he said quietly. You rely on power to solve everything. Humans learn to use whatever tools are available, including the opponent's own strength. The arena fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing. Then, slowly, applause began to build. Not from everyone. Prince Thalarix and several other powerful beings looked furious, but from enough of the crowd to make it clear that the humans' victory had been recognized. Chancellor Corvex's crystalline form materialized in the arena. The challenge is concluded. Marcus Chen of Earth has proven his worthiness through trial by combat. Queen Zalera's choice stands validated. But Vexstar wasn't finished. As he struggled to his feet, his form began to expand again, drawing on reserves of power that made his previous display look restrained. One human, he snarled. One small victory against one opponent. Do you think this changes anything? Do you think this proves that your pathetic species deserves respect? He gestured toward the assembled beings, many of whom still looked skeptical despite Marcus's victory. Look around you, human. See how many still doubt, how many still consider your elevation an insult to the natural order. Your victory here is meaningless unless you can change their hearts as well as their minds. Marcus felt exhaustion creeping through his body, but he knew Vexstar was right. Winning the trial had been just the first step. The real challenge was convincing the galaxy that humanity deserved its place among the stars. You want to see what humans can really do? Marcus asked, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. Then, give us the chance. Don't judge us by our current limitations, judge us by our potential. He turned to address the crowd directly. Every species here was primitive once. Every empire was small and weak in its beginning. The difference is that you were allowed to grow, to develop, to prove yourselves over time. All we're asking for is the same opportunity. Prince Thalaric stepped forward, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with controlled anger. Words are easy, human. Potential is meaningless without achievement. What has your species actually accomplished that would justify elevating you to rule beside the Queen of 17 Galaxies? It was the challenge Marcus had been expecting, and he had an answer ready. We survived, he said simply. The crowd stirred with confusion. Survival was the minimum requirement for any species, hardly something to boast about. You don't understand, Marcus continued. We survived on a death world. Earth has ice ages that last hundreds of thousands of years, supervolcanic eruptions that blot out the sun, asteroid impacts that mass extinct entire evolutionary lines. We survived plagues that killed half our population, wars that threatened to destroy our entire civilization, environmental collapses that forced us to completely restructure our societies. He began to pace as he spoke, his confidence growing with each word. Every other species in this room evolved on garden worlds, planets with stable climates, predictable environments, natural resources that made advancement easy. You had the luxury of developing slowly, of making mistakes without facing extinction. Marcus gestured toward the crystalline dome overhead, where the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Humans had to learn to adapt or die. We had to become resilient, creative, stubborn beyond all reason. We had to learn to work together despite our differences because isolation meant death. The Machine Emperor's optical sensors focused on him with renewed interest. Resilience is admirable. But adaptation to hostile environments is not the same as capability for galactic leadership. Isn't it? Marcus asked. What do you think space is, if not the ultimate hostile environment? What do you think building an interstellar civilization requires, if not the ability to adapt to impossible conditions and make them work? He could see he was starting to reach some of them, but others remained skeptical. It was Queen Zalera who provided the next piece of the puzzle. May I speak? She asked, her voice cutting through the debate. Chancellor Corvax nodded. The floor recognizes Queen Zalera. She stepped into the arena, her presence making the air itself seem to shimmer with potential. You want to know what I see in humanity? What I see in Marcus? Then, let me tell you what I've observed during their short time in galactic space. She began to circle the arena, her gaze touching each delegation in turn. When the Kethari rebellion threatened to destabilize the Outer Rim, who volunteered to carry supplies to besieged worlds despite having no political stake in the outcome? The humans. Murmurs ran through the crowd as they remembered the incident. When the plague ship Devastation was discovered drifting in neutral space with its crew dying and no one willing to board it for fear of contamination, who volunteered for the rescue mission? Captain Chan and his crew. Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment. Those hadn't been grand gestures, they had simply been the right thing to do. When the peace negotiations between the Solarans and the Voidwalkers reached deadlock because neither side would accept mediation from anyone they saw as potentially biased, who did both sides agree to trust as neutral arbitrators? The humans, because in 6 months of diplomatic contact, they had never once asked for anything in return for their help. Queen Zalera stopped in front of the Andromedan delegation. Prince Thalaric, when your cousin's ship suffered catastrophic failure in the neutral zone, whose vessels responded to the distress call despite being outgunned and outclassed by the raiders who had caused the damage? The prince's bioluminescent patches dimmed slightly. The human patrol ship Endeavor. And, when Captain Chen's crew rescued the survivors, did they demand payment? Did they ask for political concessions or trade agreements or territorial rights? No, Thalaric admitted reluctantly. They asked only that we ensure the survivors received proper medical care. Marcus was beginning to understand what Zalera was doing. She wasn't just defending her choice, she was building a case for humanity's character based on actions rather than words. This is what I see in humanity, she continued, her voice growing stronger. Not arrogance despite their limitations, but humility because of them. Not demands for respect, but actions that earn it. Not claims of superiority, but demonstrations of service. She turned to face the assembled crowd. Every being here represents a species that achieved greatness through conquest, through power, through the accumulation of resources and territory. Humans are the first species I've encountered that seems to believe greatness can be achieved through lifting others up rather than tearing them down. Lord Vexstar, still recovering from his defeat, managed a bitter laugh. How naive. How utterly, pathetically naive. The universe doesn't reward kindness, Zalera. It rewards strength. And, when the humans face their first real test, when they're forced to choose between their ideals and their survival, they'll choose survival just like everyone else. Perhaps, Queen Zalera agreed. But, isn't it worth finding out? Isn't it worth seeing what might be possible if we gave cooperation a chance instead of defaulting to competition? The debate might have continued for hours, but it was interrupted by an urgent communication from the monitoring stations around the palace. Chancellor Corvex received the message first, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. What is it? Queen Zalera asked. Long-range sensors are detecting an incoming fleet, Corvex replied. Unknown configuration, massive displacement, approaching at speeds that should be impossible. The dome overhead shifted to display tactical information. Dozens of ships were indeed approaching, but their design was unlike anything in the galactic databases. They moved with organic fluidity, their hulls seeming to shift and flow like living tissue. The Devourers, whispered someone in the crowd, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with Vexstar's cosmic winter. He had heard the name during his briefings, an ancient threat from beyond the galactic rim, entities that consumed entire civilizations and converted their resources into more ships, more weapons, more hunger. They had been dormant for millennia, but recent galactic expansion had apparently attracted their attention. How long until they arrive? Queen Zalera asked. 6 hours, Corvex replied. Maybe less. Their acceleration is increasing as they approach inhabited space. The assembled beings began to stir with panic. The Devourers were a threat that had united the galaxy once before, forcing ancient enemies to work together or face extinction. But that had been thousands of years ago, and the current generation had grown comfortable with their petty rivalries and political games. The defense fleets, Prince Thalaric said urgently. We need to coordinate. The defense fleets are scattered across 17 galaxies, Queen Zalera interrupted. It would take days to gather them here, and the Devourers won't wait. Marcus studied the tactical display, his mind automatically calculating vectors and probabilities. The approaching fleet was massive, easily large enough to devastate this entire system before help could arrive. But there was something about their formation that nagged at him, something familiar despite their alien nature. They're not attacking randomly, he said suddenly. Every eye in the arena turned toward him. What do you mean? Corvex asked. Marcus pointed to the display. Look at their approach vector. They're not heading for the most populated worlds or the richest systems. They're coming straight here, to this ceremony, to this gathering. Understanding dawned on several faces simultaneously. The Devourers weren't just launching a random raid, they were targeting this specific moment, when the galaxy's most powerful beings were all gathered in one place. Someone called them here, Queen Zalera said grimly. All eyes turned toward Lord Vex_Scortar, who smiled with dark satisfaction. Did you think I would accept defeat so easily? Did you think I would allow this mockery of proper order to stand unchallenged? His form began to shift again, becoming less solid and more shadow. The Devourers were my allies once, before your father destroyed my empire. I spent centuries in the void between galaxies, and they were receptive to my suggestions about the current state of galactic civilization. The arena erupted in shouts of rage and accusations, but Vex_Scortar's laughter cut through the chaos. In 6 hours, this entire system will be consumed. All your petty politics, all your grand alliances, all your debates about who deserves what, none of it will matter when you're all dead. He began to fade, preparing to escape before anyone could stop him. Enjoy your last few hours, Zalera. I hope your human was worth the destruction of everything you've built. But, before Vexstar could complete his escape, Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped forward and grabbed the shadow being's arm, holding him solid through sheer force of will. You're not going anywhere, Marcus said grimly. You helped create this mess, you're going to help fix it. Vexstar stared at him in disbelief. You cannot hold me, human. I am shadow and void, darkness given form. Maybe, Marcus replied. But, right now, you're also our only link to the Devourer fleet. And, we're going to need that if we want to save this galaxy. The confrontation was interrupted by Queen Zalera's voice, carrying the authority of cosmic law. Marcus is correct. Lord Vexstar, by ancient right of Warbond, I claim your assistance in defending against the threat you helped create. You cannot invoke Warbond against me. Vexstar protested. I can and do, she replied firmly. The law is clear: anyone who brings destruction upon the galaxy becomes responsible for stopping that destruction, regardless of their personal wishes. Chancellor Corvex's crystalline form pulsed with legal authority. The Queen's invocation is valid. Lord Vexstar, you are bound by galactic law to assist in the defense against the Devourer fleet. Marcus felt Vex_Tar's form solidify under his grip as ancient laws older than most civilizations took hold. The Shadow Lord was trapped by the same legal frameworks that govern all galactic civilization. This doesn't change anything, Vexstar snarled. Even with my knowledge of their capabilities, you cannot hope to defeat a full Devourer fleet with the forces available here. Then, we'll have to think of something else, Marcus replied. He turned to address the assembled crowd. Ladies, gentlemen, beings of all species, we have 6 hours to save this galaxy. Who's ready to get to work? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Whatever their differences, whatever their opinions about humanity or royal marriages or proper order, every being in that arena understood the threat they faced. The Devourers consumed everything: species, worlds, entire civilizations disappeared into their endless hunger. But, as plans began to form and strategies took shape, Marcus found himself thinking about what Queen Zalera had said about human nature. They were about to face the ultimate test of everything he had claimed about his species. In 6 hours, they would learn whether humanity's ideals could survive when faced with extinction itself. The war room beneath the Celestial Palace had been designed to coordinate the defense of 17 galaxies, but it had never been intended to house representatives from dozens of species working under a 6-hour deadline. The massive holographic display showed the approaching Devourer fleet in terrifying detail: hundreds of organic ships that moved like living creatures, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with an alien hunger that seemed to reach across space itself. Marcus stood at the central command station, still barely believing that beings who commanded star systems were looking to him for leadership. But, as Queen Zalera had pointed out, he was the one who had recognized the pattern in the Devourer's approach, and, in a crisis, practical solutions mattered more than protocol. Fleet composition analysis complete, announced the Machine Emperor, his synthetic form interfacing directly with the palace's quantum computers. 643 primary vessels, each approximately 10 times the mass of our largest dreadnoughts. Estimated crew capacity, unknown, but sensor readings suggest internal biomass consistent with hive mind organization. Prince Thalaric studied the tactical displays with professional military precision. Our available forces include my personal guard fleet, 12 heavy cruisers, and their escorts. The palace defense grid has significant firepower, but it's designed to repel raiders, not a full-scale invasion of this magnitude. The ethereal collective ships exist partially outside normal spacetime, added their representative, their form shifting between dimensions as they spoke. We can provide reconnaissance and limited harassment, but we lack the physical mass to engage in direct combat. One by one, the species reported their available assets. It was impressive by the standards of normal galactic politics. The assembled beings commanded enough firepower to conquer most civilizations. But, against the approaching swarm, it was woefully inadequate. Combined fleet strength approximately 130 vessels of various classes, Chancellor Corvex summarized, his crystalline form processing the tactical data with grim efficiency. Estimated survival time against the Devourer fleet, 17 minutes. A heavy silence fell over the war room. 17 minutes. Even if they could delay the Devourers that long, it wouldn't be enough time for reinforcements to arrive from the outer systems. Lord Vexstar, bound by energy shackles that prevented his escape but still compelled to assist, laughed bitterly. Did you expect a different result? The Devourers conquered half this galaxy before, and that was when they had smaller numbers and less advanced biotechnology. What you see approaching is a fleet that has consumed the resources of entire galactic clusters. Then, why did you call them here? Queen Zalera demanded, her stellar winds beginning to stir with barely controlled fury. If they're so powerful, what makes you think you can control them? I don't need to control them, Vextar replied. I merely needed to point them toward a target worth their attention. Once they've consumed this system and everyone in it, they'll lose interest in galactic affairs for another few millennia. By the time they return, I'll have rebuilt my empire and be ready to face them as an equal. Marcus had been studying the sensor readings while the others talked, looking for any weakness or pattern that might be exploited. The Devourer's ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases, but they still had to obey certain physical laws. Wait, he said suddenly. Vextar, you said you spent centuries in the void between galaxies. You had contact with them during that time? Of course. How else do you think I survived in the emptiness between stars? But the void between galaxies is essentially empty, Marcus continued, his mind racing. No resources, no energy sources except stellar radiation. What did the Devourers feed on while they were out there? Vextar's expression flickered with uncertainty. They entered a state of dormancy. Reduced metabolic function to conserve resources. For centuries, Marcus pressed. Minimal energy intake, minimal activity. And now they're approaching a target-rich environment for the first time in geological ages. Understanding began to dawn on several faces around the room. The Machine Emperor was the first to vocalize it. They will be operating at reduced efficiency. Their biosystems will need time to reach full metabolic capacity. Exactly, Marcus said, excitement growing in his voice. They're essentially starving. That's why they're coming straight here instead of stopping to consume smaller targets along the way. They need a massive energy input to restore themselves to full capacity. Prince Thalarix leaned forward, his bioluminescent patches beginning to pulse with tactical interest. If their systems are operating at reduced efficiency, their weapons and defenses might be similarly compromised. It's still a fleet of over 600 ships, pointed out the ethereal representative. Even at reduced capacity, they vastly outnumber us. Numbers aren't everything, Marcus replied, an idea beginning to form. Queen Zalera, what's the power output of this palace's main reactor? Approximately 12 terawatts at full capacity, she answered, confusion evident in her voice. Why? And the palace shields, can they be reconfigured to project outward instead of forming a defensive barrier? The palace's chief engineer, a multi-limbed being whose species specialized in advanced technology, consulted his instruments. Theoretically possible, but it would leave the palace completely unprotected. A single direct hit would be catastrophic. Marcus turned to the assembled beings, many of whom were beginning to suspect where his thoughts were leading. What if we don't try to fight them at all? What if instead we feed them? The suggestion was met with stares of disbelief. Chancellor Corvex was the first to respond, explain. The Devourers are essentially biological machines that convert energy and matter into more of themselves, Marcus said, moving to the tactical display. But biological systems have limits. There's a maximum rate at which they can process energy input. He gestured to the approaching fleet. They've been dormant for centuries, operating on minimal power. Their metabolic systems will be optimized for conservation, not consumption. If we hit them with more energy than they can safely process. Metabolic overload, breathed the Machine Emperor. Their biosystems would be overwhelmed, possibly triggering cellular breakdown. It's theoretically possible, admitted the chief engineer. But the power requirements would be enormous. We would need to channel the combined output of every reactor in the system, plus the palace's main power core, plus. He paused, calculations running behind his multifaceted eyes. We would need at least 50% more power than we have available. The room fell silent again as hope died. They had identified a potential weakness, but lacked the resources to exploit it. That was when Queen Zalera stepped forward, her expression resolute. What about stellar energy? Every being in the room turned to stare at her. Your Majesty, the chief engineer asked carefully. The palace's main reactor is a miniature star, she explained. But we're orbiting an actual star, one that's been stable for over 4 billion years. Could we tap directly into stellar output? the energy levels involved would be. The engineer began, then stopped, his instruments working furiously. It might be possible. The palace's quantum tap systems could theoretically establish a direct link to the star's corona. But the feedback through our systems would be catastrophic. Chancellor Korvax finished. The palace would be destroyed in the process. Not necessarily, Marcus interjected. He had been studying the technical specifications while they talked. What if we don't try to contain the energy? What if we turn the entire palace into a focusing lens? He moved to the holographic controls, sketching out his idea in three-dimensional light. We evacuate everyone to the outer structures, then use the palace's quantum systems to create a direct conduit from the star to a focal point just beyond the Devourer fleet's approach vector. The implications began to sink in. They weren't talking about a weapon, they were talking about creating an artificial stellar flare aimed directly at the approaching bioships. The power levels would be. The chief engineer's voice trailed off as his calculations reached completion. Approximately 800 terawatts. Delivered as coherent energy across multiple spectrums. Enough to trigger metabolic cascade failure in biological systems that aren't prepared for that level of energy input, added the Machine Emperor. It was audacious beyond belief. They were proposing to turn a star into a weapon, using technology that had never been tested at such scales. The risk of failure was enormous, and even success would likely destroy the Celestial Palace and everything in it. But it was also their only chance. The engineering challenges alone. Began the chief engineer. Can be overcome, interrupted Prince Thalarix. The Andromedans have experience with stellar engineering. Our bioluminescent technology gives us natural resonance with stellar frequencies. The ethereal collective can provide dimensional stability, added their representative. Our existence outside normal spacetime allows us to anchor the energy conduits. Machine Empire computational resources can calculate the precise targeting requirements, the Machine Emperor offered. One by one, each species began volunteering their unique capabilities. The same beings who had been competing for political advantage hours earlier were now working together to save their galaxy. Lord Vextar watched the proceedings with growing alarm. This is madness. Even if your plan works, the energy release will be visible across half the galaxy. Every species, every civilization will know what happened here. Good, Queen Zalera replied firmly. Let them know that when threatened with extinction, the galaxy chose cooperation over conquest. Marcus was coordinating the technical details when a priority communication arrived from the outer sensor network. The Devourer fleet had increased its acceleration again, they would arrive in 4 hours rather than 6. We need to begin immediately, the chief engineer announced. The stellar tap will require at least 3 hours to establish and calibrate. What about evacuation? Asked Chancellor Korvax. No time, Marcus replied grimly. Everyone who stays to operate the systems will be at the focal point when the energy releases. We'll need volunteers. The response was immediate. Every single being in the room stepped forward. I'll coordinate the stellar interface, Prince Thalarix announced. Andromedan bioluminescence gives us the best chance of surviving the energy feedback. Machine Empire units can handle the computational load, added the Machine Emperor. Synthetic forms are more resilient to radiation exposure. The ethereal collective will maintain dimensional stability, their representative confirmed. We exist partially outside normal space, the energy release may not affect us as severely. But it was Queen Zalera's declaration that surprised everyone most. I'll establish the quantum tap directly. My nature as a stellar entity gives me the best chance of surviving contact with raw solar energy. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. You're the queen of 17 galaxies. You can't risk I can and I will, she interrupted, her voice carrying absolute authority. This is my realm, my responsibility. If it's to be saved, I should be the one to take the greatest risk. Marcus realized he was seeing another aspect of why Zalera was considered the greatest ruler in galactic history. She didn't command from safety, she led from the front, sharing the dangers she asked others to face. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. The palace's massive structures were reconfigured into a complex energy focusing system. The quantum tap was established with direct connection to the star's core, requiring Zalera to literally become part of the stellar matrix for periods of time that should have been lethal. Meanwhile, the combined fleets took up positions to provide covering fire and, hopefully, delay the Devourers long enough for the plan to work. It wasn't much of a delay they could offer, but every minute mattered. Marcus found himself in the central control chamber, monitoring the energy buildup while staying in communication with all the different species working to make this impossible plan succeed. The irony wasn't lost on him. The human who had been dismissed as primitive was now coordinating the efforts of beings who could individually reshape reality. Stellar interface at 60%, Prince Thalarix reported, his bioluminescent patches blazing with captured solar energy. We're approaching the point where the feedback will begin to affect biological systems. Computational matrices stable, the Machine Emperor added. Targeting solutions updated for the Devourer's current approach vector. Dimensional anchors holding, confirmed the ethereal representative, though their form was becoming increasingly translucent as they struggled to maintain existence across multiple realities simultaneously. Queen Zalera's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, as she had become distributed through the stellar tap matrix, quantum interface approaching critical threshold. Marcus, are you ready to coordinate the final sequence? Marcus looked around the control chamber at the beings who had become unlikely allies in this desperate gamble. Hours ago, they had been political rivals. Now they were working together to save their galaxy, trusting a human to guide their efforts. As ready as anyone can be, he replied. Initiate final sequence on my mark. The main display showed the Devourer fleet approaching the edge of the system, their bioluminescent hulls beginning to glow brighter as they sensed the energy-rich environment ahead. They were beautiful in their own terrible way, like living ships sailing through an ocean of stars. But they were also death incarnate, entities that existed only to consume and convert everything they encountered into more of themselves. If this plan failed, it wouldn't just be the end of this system, it would be the beginning of another galactic extinction. Devourer fleet entering targeting range, reported the Outer Sensor Network. Estimated time to planet fall, 18 minutes. All systems showing green, Marcus announced. Beginning countdown. 10, 9, 8. He could feel the tension building through the quantum links, every being connected to the system holding their breath as impossible energies built toward release. 7, 6, 5. The star itself seemed to pulse, responding to the quantum tap that was drawing directly from its core. The palace structures groaned under stresses they were never designed to handle. 4, 3, 2. Marcus thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who would never know how close they had come to extinction. He thought about the species gathered here, working together despite their differences because the alternative was unthinkable. 1. Mark. The energy release was beyond description. For a moment that lasted forever, the star's fury was unleashed in a focused beam that crossed the system at the speed of light. The palace shuddered and began to come apart as forces beyond imagination flowed through its structure. The beam struck the Devourer fleet just as they were beginning their final approach. The bioships, their systems optimized for energy conservation after centuries of dormancy, were completely unprepared for the massive energy influx. Their organic hulls began to glow, then burn, then simply dissolve as their metabolic processes were overwhelmed. One by one, the great ships of the Devourer fleet were consumed by the very energy they had come to harvest. Their bioluminescent displays went from hunger to confusion to terror as they realized what was happening to them. In less than 10 minutes, 600 ships that had survived the void between galaxies were reduced to dispersing clouds of organic matter. But the victory came at a cost. The palace was collapsing around them, its structure unable to contain the forces they had unleashed. Emergency systems screamed warnings as quantum matrices began to fail and reality itself started to buckle under the strain. Evacuation protocols activated, Marcus announced, though he knew most of them wouldn't make it to the escape pods in time. That was when Queen Zalera did something that cemented her legend forever. Instead of trying to save herself, she used the last of her connection to the stellar tap to create a protective barrier around the control chamber. The energy that should have killed them all was redirected back into space, giving them the precious minutes needed for evacuation. The cost was enormous. When Marcus reached her, Zalera had collapsed, her stellar form flickering between solid and energy. The effort of redirecting that much power had nearly destroyed her. "The fleet," she whispered as Marcus knelt beside her. "Gone," he replied, cradling her head in his lap. "Every single ship. The galaxy is safe." She smiled, and, for a moment her cosmic beauty shone through the exhaustion. Worth it. Was it all worth it? Around them, the surviving beings were helping each other toward the escape pods. Prince Thalarix, his bioluminescent patches dim but still functioning, was supporting two injured technicians. The Machine Emperor had reconfigured his structure to carry equipment too important to lose. The ethereal representative was phasing in and out of existence but still maintaining dimensional stability around the escape route. They had done it. Against impossible odds, using untested technology and unprecedented cooperation, they had saved the galaxy from extinction. But, more than that, they had proved something important about the nature of power and worth. It hadn't been the strongest or most advanced species that saved them, it had been their willingness to work together, to combine their different strengths into something greater than any of them could achieve alone. The escape pods launched just as the palace finally succumbed to the forces they had unleashed. The ancient structure, which had stood for millennia as a symbol of galactic power, dissolved into light and energy, taking with it the quantum systems that had made their victory possible. But, as they watched from their pods, something unexpected happened. The energy released by the palace's destruction didn't dissipate, it began to coalesce, forming new patterns in space itself. The stellar tap, even in its death throes, was creating something that had never existed before. "What is that?" Marcus asked, staring at the display. Queen Zalera, her strength slowly returning as her stellar nature began to reassert itself, smiled with wonder. "It's a beacon," she breathed. "A quantum lighthouse that will broadcast our message across the galaxy." The beacon pulsed with harmonics that carried far more than simple information. It carried the story of what had happened here, how beings who should have been enemies had chosen to work together, how they had found strength and unity that no single species could have achieved alone. It carried hope. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy slowly absorbed the implications of what had occurred at the Celestial Palace. The Devourer threat was gone, but, more importantly, a new model of cooperation had been demonstrated. Species that had maintained hostile relations for millennia began to reconsider their positions. The Andromedans, led by Prince Thalarix, proposed new trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. The Machine Empire began sharing technological advances that could improve life for organic species. The Ethereal Collective offered their dimensional expertise to help solve practical problems rather than remaining aloof from galactic affairs. Even Lord Vextar, bound by the legal obligations that had compelled his assistance, found himself questioning the philosophy of destruction that had driven him for so long. Watching beings sacrifice themselves for the greater good had been a revelation he was still trying to understand. But, perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. Marcus found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the Galactic Council with full voting rights, not as a representative of a minor species, but as the voice of a people who had proven their worth when it mattered most. The prejudices and dismissive attitudes that had greeted Earth's entry into galactic civilization began to evaporate as other species realized what humans could contribute. It wasn't just courage or adaptability, though those remained important. It was perspective, the ability to see possibilities that others missed, to find solutions that seemed impossible until someone actually tried them. Humans brought something the galaxy hadn't realized it was missing, the willingness to believe that things could be better than they were. The wedding of Queen Zalera and Marcus Chen took place 6 months later on a new space station built at the coordinates where the Celestial Palace had once stood. Representatives from across the galaxy attended, but, this time the atmosphere was celebration rather than political maneuvering. As they exchanged vows using words from dozens of languages and species, the quantum beacon continued to pulse in the background, broadcasting its message of cooperation and hope to anyone willing to listen. "Do you think it will last?" Marcus asked during a quiet moment as they watched the stars wheel overhead. Zalera smiled, her nebula eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. "Nothing lasts forever," she replied. "But that doesn't mean it isn't worth doing. Every generation has to choose between fear and hope, between isolation and connection. All we can do is set an example and hope that when their time comes, they'll choose wisely.
Marcus nodded, understanding.
They hadn't solved all of the galaxy's problems, there would be new challenges, new threats, new opportunities for both cooperation and conflict. But they had shown that alternatives existed, that power didn't have to mean domination, that strength could be found in unity rather than superiority.
Somewhere in the vast cosmos, new species would eventually emerge to join galactic civilization.
They would face the same choices,